Welcome to The One Inside, an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's episode, I chat with Heidi Lindeman about suicidal parts. I am so excited to tell you about the Heirloom Summit, which is co-created by Duran Young, founder of Black Therapist Rock, and Dick Swartz, founder of IFS. It is intentionally taking place during Black History Month on February 26th through the 28th. We are going to be offering this collective healing experience as a powerful opportunity to explore the legacy burden of racism and anti-Blackness. Using IFS, we will explore the witnessing and unburdening process to work towards increased self-leadership and to begin repairing the personal impact of our traumatic history as a nation. Stay tuned for a link for the listeners of the One Inside podcast so you can receive a discount when you register. Hey everyone. Hope you're doing okay. If you're listening to this in real time when it's published, it's been a pretty tough week. So for America, a part of me wasn't sure how to say that. So I'm just noticing my parts. So I'm just inviting you to notice your parts up around that as you sort of shift into whatever you're doing and whatever you've been thinking about and experiencing with that, and shift into hanging out with Heidi and I and listening to this podcast and maybe taking a little bit of a break from all of that. So one thing I'm noticing a lot is just parts that need to distract, and parts that literally was watching my dog destroy this long pink dog stuffy thing and just sort of staring at her like numbly, like, what is happening? So I feel like that's, yeah, right. I'm watching the TV that way with this numb, what is happening? And then my favorite firefighter behaviors coming up. Yeah, so I'm just noticing all of that. So I just invite you to notice that. But as we shift, today I talk with Heidi. Heidi is a level 2 trained IFS therapist who is passionate about helping others transform their relationship with suicidal parts. And you could hear this, you could hear her passion throughout this her incredible story that she shares throughout this episode of suffering with parts of her who were giving her suicidal thoughts and obsessions and images for years and years, and the healing transformation that came when she began to listen to those parts and relate to them differently. And the transformation that happens with those parts, it's amazing. And so, on one hand, I'm like, it's amazing. And then the other hand, I'm like, if you know this model, then you know the promise that this model gives. And so I just so appreciate Heidi sharing her story. I was wondering if I should give sort of a trigger warning. I think she does such a good job of being careful around her wording and sort of what she shares and how she shares it. But we are talking about suicidal parts. And so just, if you need to take care of parts of you that might have some sensitivity to that, or I don't know. So I just sort of want you to know that. I think she handles it very well. And if anything, this episode is so hopeful. And so I hope that my hope for you is that you will share this episode with either a client that you have that's struggling with suicidal parts, or with family members, or with your therapist, practitioner, coaching friends that feel afraid and overwhelmed when someone comes into the room or over Zoom and they're struggling. I hope you would share it with people, because I think that's what this is about, is giving this information so that you can give it out to others so that it can be helpful to them. So Heidi's website and YouTube channel is on the show notes, but her website is selfgroundedtherapy.org. I think her YouTube channel sounds the same. If you want to connect with me, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear how you're doing. I am IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter, and you can find me at the One Inside Facebook page. Enjoy. I like to start with just asking people where they are in the world and what they would see if they look out their nearest window.
If I look out my new, well, there's a window in front of me and I see a roof in front of me. It's really not all that exciting. But if I look out the window to my right, I see um, well, it's part of a church and there's some snow on the church. You can see some of the stained glass windows and there's part of a tree coming up in there. That one's a little bit more exciting than the one right in front
In
of
the
me.
roof. So okay, so with those hints, you're giving me a couple hints about whether you're like maybe more in a city, and you're also telling me you're somewhere where it snows.
Yeah. Yes.
So where are you in the world?
I live in Longmont, Colorado.
Okay, and is that more of a city or a suburb, or how would you describe that?
Longmont is a city. It's um like one of the smaller cities in Colorado. I think of Denver as being like the big city,
Yeah.
like that's the city. But then we have Longmont and Boulder, which technically are cities, but kind of sometimes feel like small towns, but they're not actually small towns. They are cities.
Is that the same is your town, does it have a small town feeling to it, even if it's a city? Your
It
city, does
does.
okay.
Yeah, because like I live 2 blocks away from Main Street, and Main Street is, 5, 6, 7 blocks, and it's little tiny shops, and so
Love it.
that feels like small town. But then it's a pretty big area still, so there's lots of houses, and then there's lots of fast food restaurants if you drive to other places in Longmont, and there's so it's got the little small town feel, but also the bigger city.
So, somebody, which you know who this is, but somebody introduced us, which I'm so grateful
Hmm.
for, and said that you would be a great person to chat on the podcast. And so it's been just super fun getting to know you. And I want to talk a little bit about, if it feels okay to sort of just start off with a little bit about your story. So I know that you have a passion for working with people who have suicidal parts.
Yes.
And I and talking to you from like when we talked before when we met, I loved. You can tell that you have a passion about that. So tell me about your own story as much as you want to, and how you came to have such a passion for working with those precious suicidal parts.
Yeah, I really do. Even as you say that, I get all these goosebumps. I'm like, oh, this is my love. I love this so much. Which to me is, it's lovely that that happens for me, but also sometimes there's like, huh, that's interesting. Who likes working with suicidal parts? But I do.
Yes,
And a
right.
lot of that came from my own history with having suicidal thoughts myself and having this journey of really not knowing what to do when they came up and wading through them and figuring out how to like really quick story is how to hear the suicidal thoughts, and I had a lot of different methods that would come up from in mind for me, and I listened to each one of those in particular and was able to translate those into what messages are they telling me, and then what self-care do I need, and that was all before I ever found IFS. That was just
Just
my
natural, just sort of
life.
organic. Yeah, which I
Yeah.
that's so many people will say that about IFS is like, "Wow, I've been doing this anyways, or I've been thinking
Mhm.
this way anyways," and IFS just
Yeah.
gave me a structure for that.
Yeah.
Would you feel comfortable talking about what you mean? Because you just said so
Yeah.
much right there about listening to all those different voices and all those different methods and what they all need. They all needed something different from you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, when they, so first, I'm just go back a little bit. I had passive suicidal thoughts in my teenage years, like just thoughts of, I'd lay in bed and kind of pray that I would die and would hope that I wouldn't wake up, but I didn't think about how I would do that. I would just hope that it would happen somehow. And then they switched into active suicidal thoughts where I started thinking about taking pills or other ways that you can actually kill yourself, and started researching them and knew that was like, oh, something shifted. Luckily, I had a therapist at that time. And after It really was like I spent hours on the computer looking at this stuff up, and then somehow came to it as like, oh my goodness. And if I had known IFS then, what would have, how I would translate that now is like the suicidal part took over at that moment and was doing the research. And then myself or another part jumped in and was like, this is not where we're going. And then I called my therapist and was like, I wasn't freaking out, but I was like, seems serious. And I think I need
Mm,
some extra help. Can I have a session like
mm,
right now? And she was able, I think, to get me in that day or the next day. And then it was years of, probably like 5 years of having active suicidal thoughts, and it would go in different degrees. Sometimes it was not all that intense, and sometimes it was like hours and hours and hours thinking of images and ways to kill myself, and that would, be pills or a gun or overdosing, or I mean, I guess that's pills, drinking too much to overdose with the pills, or
yeah.
cutting myself, or like there's just so many things that came up. And I started to realize that
Sorry.
the the messages that I could place with the particular method were different. So when I thought about taking pills, it was usually a message of you're really, really tired. So then I could translate that into a self-care thing of like, take a nap, like literally go take a nap. That's what you need right now. Stop trying to do all of the things that all my other parts are telling me to do. Of course, I didn't know part language then, but
Right, right.
all these pressures of life, or you need to go do this thing, or you need to do, I was in school at the moment, like you have to read the 400 pages that they assigned us, like whatever it was. And then just started realizing that there were different things for different ones. So like the gun one was usually associated with that I thought that I, as a human, was a problem. That, and a mistake, really, actually, and that I was, the only way to solve that mistake was to make my life end. And a
Wow.
gun is, so it's like that was the deepest spaces. And then I realized, oh, if I can tell myself like affirmations like you are not a problem. And I was in therapy, so like my therapist helped me do this and to feel it, and we did a lot of imagery, a lot of like, um I have this space that I go to that is really gorgeous in my head. I imagine this like going to this waterfall, and it's
Mm,
this gorgeous waterfall that has this healing energy, and just imagining that water falling over me would help me to realize, oh right, I'm not a problem, and we can try to help let that wash away a little bit.
mm,
I'm not a mistake as a human. Um,
mm.
so all of them have a different meaning. The alcohol one, I was talking to one of my friends about it, and we were just like brainstorming, okay, what in our society does it mean when we drink alcohol? And for me, it's usually a social thing. I don't drink really unless it's a holiday and we're, hanging out and having a glass of wine or something. So it's usually combined with the social. So when that comes up, it's like, oh, you need connection with your social community. So call your friend, or
Mm.
walk outside and go get coffee with somebody or something. So it's
Wow.
recognizing all those differences.
That's amazing. Okay, so I have two thoughts about that. First of all, I think that's fascinating. One thought is, did you have a part that did you notice about like the part that was sort of obsessively looking at things for hours? Like, was that a part that needed a message or something? Like, what was it about that? Like, sort of having to do that for hours and hours and hours?
That was trying to fix the problems that were happening. That was the internal emotional problem. Most of it was an internal emotional thing of something was happening, and we don't want to actually feel that thing, or that stuff feels too intense, or emotions are scary. Um, so if we can just stay here, at least we have a direction of something and how we can fix the
Yeah.
emotions.
Right, because 'cause I'm actually feeling like the looking it up, even if it was looking up how to kill myself with a gun or how to get a gun, there was something about looking it up that was probably helpful or soothing or was
Mhm,
fixing something, just the looking it up.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it gave a sense of, I can do something about this. It gave a sense of like there's
Yeah.
something can be done.
Yeah. I'm gonna research it too, right? Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
research it and, um well, and we hear that, like, okay, there's a lot of times suicidal parts just want a way out, right? And it's the ultimate way out. I just want the pain to stop. And I don't want to kill myself necessarily, but I just want the
Mhm.
pain to stop. And it sounds like for you, well, so we talk about firefighters will find, or any parts of us will find sort of one method. So I talk a lot about, my parts that overeat. And so it's not just one part. It's like that idea that a part will find one method for soothing us, and then other parts will use the same thing. Like, oh, look, that worked. We'll all do it. That'll help her out. And so then you end up with like 10 parts that do sort of the same behavior, but they do it for different reasons. So I
Mhm.
feel like that's sort of the same thing as what you're saying.
Yeah, I could see that. When I actually came to IFS and found IFS, I clearly have 2 suicidal parts, and they work in different ways. So I have one who, um, her name is Death Stare, and she doesn't live in my head anymore, but she did live in my head, and she was the one who brought up all of the ideas. She she was the one responsible for the research, actually. She's like, and she would have all these images, and she's very creative and all kinds of lots of things. Like, and I would actually, when met her, so I used to have images of killing myself, and that's really how it came up. Like, I would see myself
Mm,
in certain situations acting on the suicidal thoughts in certain ways. But one of them was drowning, and it was interesting because when I would have that one, it would look like I had long, dark black hair, which I do not have. My hair is not black. It's, I don't know, brown or something. And it's not long, like not even close. And it wasn't then either, but like super dark black long hair. And I would see this image of this person who has a very lifeless face
mm,
floating and knew that it was me, even though it didn't look like me. And when
mhm,
I met her, that's what she looks like. It's like, oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. So then my other one, he is the one who I have worked the most with because his name was Shadow Monster, and he really did look like a monster, like a furry. He had, it was black and like just like a shadow, but furry. And he was the one who had the urgency to act on the thoughts and was the one who was putting out the like, let's actually do this. This is going to fix it. This is going to change this. And we worked when I found IFS. That was the part that my IFS therapist and I worked with the most, and worked with boundaries and um, helping him, one, feel heard, understood, and also at the same time the boundaries of like, we're not going to keep doing this. I hear you, so hear you, like you're so loud. I Its message is clear, and we're going to find a different way.
mm.
um and I worked with him a lot, and then at some point he actually switched. He unburdened, and now he lives as Ryan, and he kind of looks like Prince Eric from The Little Mermaid, but with blonde hair. And he's my most caring part. So he has switched his role.
Wow.
Before he was trying to kill all of my parts, and now he is actually a caretaker, and he is so compassionate and he sat with the death stare for a long time, just being with her. She was very depressed, and just being that energy for her. It's, yeah, that's, we went way far into the future.
I love it. That's so beautiful. Is Death Stare still Death Stare?
She is still death stare, but she no longer lives in my brain. So she's not. She doesn't bring up suicidal thoughts. I don't really have many suicidal thoughts anymore. I haven't had one in a while. I mean, they do come in here and there, but I relate to them differently now than I did before. She's now just kind of searching for herself and who she is. I have a forest inside. I love IFS, but sometimes when I talk about it, I'm like, does this make sense to anybody else?
I know, I'm
Yes, I
like,
have
"Yeah,
a
of course you do," but right, someone else would yeah, listen, they're like, "Wait, what?" Yeah, yeah.
so she's out in the forest, which is a lovely space that she likes, and
Mm,
she's by a river and hanging out, and
mm,
just kind of she's just searching for who is she. She
mm.
was like 20-year-old, so she was, you know, hasn't quite fully figured out who she is and who she is outside of being depressed and bringing up suicidal thoughts.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
still searching for that, but
And there's a part of me that's like, does she look like Ariel? Like, does she changed her appearance and she's by the water? Like, is she, we can have like a little mermaid thing and she's like more like Ariel and that's what she's finding her voice and
maybe she will be. I don't know. We'll see.
not
It's
to tell
fun.
you that, but it is funny when you're talking about this stuff and it seems very like normal and natural when you're talking to someone else with IFS
Hmm.
and you're like, yeah, this is and people are they get it. And then when you do the same thing with someone who's not IFS and they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
What's happening to you? Um, yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. How was that feeling for you sharing that? That was great.
It feels okay. It feels good. It's really just bringing back the reminder or the of like how far my parts have journeyed and how this journey has come so far from literally laying in my bed for hours seeing images of my own death, and they weren't very pleasant. They're you know there was a lot of blood and stuff, and it wasn't very pleasant to sit in them, and
Mm,
distressing to some of my parts, to
yeah.
come to a point where I can talk about my suicidal parts in a way in which I so deeply am grateful for them and love them and care about them and know that the surface level thing that comes up, like the suicidal aspects of it, that's not, it's not what they're actually needing or saying. It's just that happens to be the language that they knew. And of
Yeah.
course now they're switching to a different language. So it's just this like deep gratitude
Yeah.
that I have been able to go on this kind of journey and learn that much about having suicidal thoughts, which just in our society, there's so much fear around.
Yeah. So, can you talk about that? And at the same time, if it seems like it goes together, talk about that, the fear around suicidal thoughts, the fear that you might have having suicidal thoughts and the fear that someone else might have if you talk about it. And then the other thing I
Mhm.
want you to talk about if it relates is the idea of relating to those parts in a different way. Because you said
Mhm.
that and I was like, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if I like look at my own story, um, I knew that there was that I should be concerned when I started looking up ways to kill myself online. But I knew that because of the outside society saying, you're not supposed to kill yourself.
Mm,
This is a big problem. But there was something inside of me that was like, ooh, we got to stop. We got to do something different.
yeah.
And
Was
there
there
are
go ahead, I'm sorry.
there are actual parts of me who are scared of my suicidal parts, or they're not that scared anymore because, but like Shadow Monster, he literally was chasing a teenager around, and he had a knife, and she was terrified. And then my little parts are so super super scared of him, like monsters, and I have two other monsters, but they're not suicidal. I just happen to
Scary
have three
monsters.
monsters inside of me. I don't know. Um, so there's that. But then I also learned from the outside, particularly without IFS therapists. So there was a time in which I went to the walk-in crisis center because it was just so overwhelming. I was having a hard time working with my parts on my own, and I really needed the additional support. And at this point I knew IFS, and I had these three monsters. So I had Shadow Monster, Swamp Monster, and the Zombie Monster. Um, which relates to depression, and it's just this like not being able to move and just feeling so stuck. Um,
Mhm.
but I was talking to the crisis clinician about the monsters are up again. And in my head, I'm like, it's not a big deal that the monsters are up again. With my IFS therapist, we would meet with them and we would have some compassion towards them and figure out what they're doing and learn from them and just explore them and be with them. And then everything would settle down and I would be not overwhelmed by them.
Mhm.
I that to a crisis clinician who does not know IFS, and she was ready to put me on a hold.
So
And
say what that means to people that might not
um,
know what that means. Yeah.
she was going to call and admit me to the hospital to be watched on a 72-hour hold. I wouldn't be able to leave, and they would have to do assessments and
Like
do what they
psychiatric,
psych
we think you have like schizophrenia or something.
something. I
Yes,
don't know what
yes.
she was thinking, but
She was freaked
something.
out. It freaked out her parts, right? Her parts were really
Yeah,
scared.
right. So that's where the fear comes in from other people. They even clinicians.
Yeah.
That's not. I'm like could go into the whole world of whenever I've mentioned, not whenever, but generally when I talk about suicide or having suicidal thoughts to family or friends or coworkers, because I have become very, very open with them because I have become so comfortable in myself with them that it doesn't feel that different than having a conversation about, oh yeah, I'm going to go walk down to the coffee shop and get some coffee. You want to come? Oh, I'm having some thoughts of suicide right now. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I need to take a break. Like they feel similar to me, but people would respond and be like, oh my goodness, I'm concerned about you. And I'm really like, I need you to do something different. This
Yeah.
kind of like, what
Yeah. And then what would
thought?
yeah, how would your parts respond to that?
That was probably the hardest of all of it because they
Mhm.
felt very shut down. Then I would go inside. They would actually become stronger at that moment,
Wow.
generally. Um, and feel like they were not validated and that they were wrong in some way that then would trigger my other parts who felt like I was wrong or a mistake, and then they would come in and try and fix it. So, it's a fun little swirl there
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
things that would happen.
Yeah. Well, thinking of a family, right? The internal family systems, like that's the
Right,
family dance that would happen inside of you. That's what you're describing as sort of this
right,
your inner family would be all freaking out and freaking out each other.
right. Yeah. And freaking out the people on the outside.
Yeah.
So
Freaking
then,
out your external family. Yeah.
yeah. So then I learned, or my parts learned, that when we talk about suicide to other people, it has to be done in a particular way with particular people. So there were safe people who were able to be with me in it and hold that with me, some really close, dear friends, most
Mhm.
of who went through my counseling program with me. So are also counselors. Yay for being a therapist and knowing a lot of
Lots of
therapists.
therapists. Yeah. Yeah.
Not that I was asking for therapy from them, but you know, it's real
Right.
life stuff.
Right.
Um, so I would turn to them, but I also got really good at telling them, here's what's happening right now, because I really needed the acknowledgement of, here's what my suicidal thoughts are like right now, here's what's going on. And I would do my best to tell them, one, either here's what I need from you, or here's what I'm going to go do for self care. So that they were not left with the like, oh, Heidi's having suicidal thoughts again, and she's been having them for a week and a half. We need to freak out. There was
Yeah.
always the like cushioning it with, and I'm going to go swimming to take care of myself. And I'm going to call my therapist tomorrow if it doesn't go away. And I'm going to go for a walk right now. And I'm going to like whatever it was, which they responded to better.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about why that's important? Because I think I think what happens is, yeah. Well, tell me why that's important.
Why the talking to
Why telling your friends and then telling them in that way, like saying, "Here's
oh
what's happening with me, and here's what I'm gonna do, or here's what I need from you,"
yeah. So
instead
telling
of
them
like, "I'm
it's
suicidal," and
right.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I my guess is that it gave them the reassurance or the clarity that I'm actually doing something to take care of myself. It also made it very clear if I need something from them, what it is I need.
yeah,
Even if I didn't know if I needed something, like, "I need you to be here," or, "Can we maybe get together sometime soon?" Or, like, as I'm trying to problem solve and shoot what it is, because I didn't always know what I needed.
yeah. Well, that's
Um
one of the things that's really hard, right? If you're depressed or if you're suicidal or if you're anxious, you don't know what you need. You're like, I'm just feeling these, I'm just
Mhm,
flooded with these parts. And
mhm.
so I'm guessing though um it helps save a lot of your relationships.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah. It also in ways helped me to be accountable to the self-care thing that I was gonna go do. So
Yeah.
telling them, like, "Hey, I'm gonna go swimming now." Then I would actually go swimming instead of allowing my parts to stay in the depressed space and not, I mean, they were still in the depressed space,
Right.
whether I was swimming or not, but
Right.
to get the motivation to go swimming, which is something that is a really important self-care thing for me, or has
Mm.
been. COVID has sucked because I haven't been able to go swimming, but
I mean, I guess you're sort of explaining like how you're relating to your parts differently and then how you're relating sort of inside and outside and how you're trying to relate to those things differently.
right, yes.
Okay.
That sec I can explain more about that too. I
I want
totally missed
yeah, can you
part of the question.
yeah, I know, I'm sorry. I love to ask like 5 questions in a row. Can you talk a little bit about that, about relating to your parts differently?
Yeah, that's a it's been such a journey. So, I think it helps. I'm gonna talk about, particularly, Shadow Monster right now because I actually think giving an example of it will help make it more clear. So, when I first met him and I was working with my IFS therapist who I just adore. I don't work with her anymore, she lives in Hawaii, but oh, adore her. She was a lifesaver. She used to say, "Boundaries equal love." She would say it a lot, and it was something that I and Shadow Monster just soaked up and loved. And when I first started working with him, he liked her and respected her more than he respected me, which was an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah.
So, like when we were in sessions together, and she would say, "Boundaries equal love." Just want to remind you, boundaries equal love. It's really important that we have boundaries for this part, and here's how we're going to do it. And we created well, I created a house, a castle for my three monsters that they could live in together because they didn't want to be alone. And I also needed I needed to know where they were, and I needed Shadow Monster to not be running around trying to kill my parts inside my forest. Um, so it's like, "We're gonna go here," and she suggested, like, let's create a space, and he got to create part of it, and like they each got to create different parts of it so that it was their space and they wanted to be there.
Right, right. It wasn't like The Beast. Speaking of another Disney
Right.
movie, it
Right.
wasn't like, right, the beast is trapped, right? So they
Right.
all and they loved that because that's sort of the
Right.
idea of boundaries is we actually really like boundaries. I feel
Right.
freer in boundaries. So,
Right.
yeah, I feel more stable in boundaries and all that good stuff. So,
Right.
yeah, okay, so they end
Exactly.
up in this castle
So,
and
yeah.
then they end up feeling better in there and probably relating to you and you to them differently.
Yeah. Yeah. So then he actually respected me more, and he liked me more, and he was able to have conversations with me instead of trying to always get past me to talk to Diana, who was my therapist.
Love it,
But
love
he
it. So there's
still
that
loves
self-leadership part right
yeah.
there.
Yep. He still loves it whenever she's around. Like, she has the most amazing self energy ever of this super she's the kindest human I know. And
Wow.
she's so super kind, but yet at the same time, her groundedness and the way that she can be to clearly state boundaries is like I've never met anybody who can do it with that much compassion and kindness. And she just
Mm.
exudes it, just like who she is. Um, so that was really helpful. And but then he started to be able to relate to me and trust me more. So it's really what it is it's building trust because I haven't he hasn't known me because parts just don't know you until we actually show up for them.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and worked along a lot with him to build trust. And it was when he was running around in the forest with the knife, it was me who stepped in and was like, okay, I see that. And I hear you and I see what you're doing. And I need you to give me the knife. I did do this in session with Diana, but
Right.
um, and he did reluctantly. He was acting like a teenager, which he totally was. Like, fine, here you go, here's the knife. But then we got to take the knife, and together we got to be like, okay, so what do we want to do with this? And he helped me decide we're going to plant it, and it grew into a silver tree. So there's just the silver tree in the forest, but it's not something that's going to kill any of my parts.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
After that, he really did, I think, respect me a lot more after that situation of being like, yeah, I hear you, but like being very clear, like, I hear you. I see what you're trying to do. I actually really do. Thank you for trying to help fix these problems and like really actually meaning it. And
Right. Yeah. Because he can feel
it's,
that. He's going to know if that's not true. Yeah.
yeah. And also being strong and confident and letting him know. And this isn't good for all the other parts.
Yeah. That's great.
So I need you to give me the knife. And he did. And then he, like, just the respect between the two of us and the gratitude that I felt for him just started to overflow. And then we just kept continuing to work together, and these kinds of things would happen. He didn't get a knife again, but just the interactions of I'm here and I hear you.
Mm.
And also tuning into him sooner. So Diana also helped me to help him know that he didn't have to scream like suicidal thoughts. The strong suicidal desires are screaming like, we got a situation here, pay attention. So she helped us learn how he can just tap on my shoulder just gently, and it really came in a physical feeling. It was just this sensation that I would get, this feeling, and then I would turn towards him and be like, oh, hi, you're here. Actually, what you're like, literally, I would do that, put my hand on my heart and be like, oh, hi, okay.
Yeah.
And taking that pause, taking that moment
Yeah.
in the middle of my workday or whatever I was doing at that moment. And it usually was, those were, you know, 30 seconds, maybe a minute.
Wow.
Maybe I would just get up and go for a 5-minute walk, depending on kind of what it was. But I was attuning to him and actually giving him attention.
Yeah, and I was thinking that that is the opposite of, I think, what we are either told to do or taught to do or have the urgency to do or the urge to do with suicidal parts. Right? I need to
Right.
ignore them. I'm ashamed of them. I'm embarrassed by them. I don't talk about them. I don't look at them. And then what happens is they get louder.
Right.
Just like if I say to my son, pick up your shoes, pick up your shoes, pick up your shoes, pick up your shoes, and then I have to scream, pick up your shoes. I think our
Right.
parts do the same thing. They have to scream at us. Like you said, we're not paying attention to them. We're paying attention to other
Right.
parts or, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Love that. So you just build this beautiful relationship with him.
Yep. Yeah. And I kept doing it. And then the unburdening happened. I wasn't even trying to unburden him. Like, there's been a part, maybe, I don't know, for a while that's like, I might have suicidal thoughts for my entire life. And that's okay. I got to at some point, it was like, I'm going to have suicidal thoughts forever. And I'm going to die by suicide. It's just inevitable, which was clearly a part.
Yeah.
And then the self energy comes in of more of, um, I'm aware that you're here and these suicidal thoughts come up, and there's nothing wrong with them. And it's
Mm.
okay if they come up. And if you talk to me in a different way too, that's great too. And I respect you and I honor you, and I'm also not going to act on them. Like I You're bringing that up, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be with you and be like, "Okay, so what's going on? What happened here? Where are we? What's happening here?" So it's like I related differently to them instead of trying to like fix them or make them go away or thinking, well, it's just inevitable. It became oh, it's just a message. It's just a way in which you're talking to me. Okay, I can do that. I can hear you out.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. And I actually feel like isn't that what we want to do to all of our parts? Right?
Right.
Whatever the part is saying is I want to turn to them and no matter what they're saying is saying like, "Hey, what's up? What do you need? What's happening? Let's connect. Let's talk. What's
Mhm.
happening for you?" And then yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. I love the fact that I have done that with suicidal parts, and this is one of the reasons why I love working with my own suicidal parts, but also with clients who have suicidal thoughts, is to be able to do that with a suicidal part. There's this sense of like, I can do that with anything else. Like the intense suicidal stuff, it's so intense that there's really nothing else that's going to measure
Mm,
that kind of intensity. I mean,
yeah.
maybe not never, potentially some exiles and some like trauma stuff, but
Right. I
if
get it.
I've
Yeah, I
done
get
it, I
what you're
can do
saying
it.
though. Right, right, right. Like if I can do that with the one that keeps giving me these bloody, horrible images, then I can do
Right.
that with the one that's telling me to eat all the cupcakes.
Right. Exactly.
I
Yes.
mean, maybe
Yeah.
that's just me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the one who's just really sad. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, right. Sadness doesn't seem as scary.
Yeah. It's like, it's not going to kill me, even though I have parts that think that being sad is going to kill me,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not.
yeah.
Whereas suicidal thoughts, if you act on them, they literally could kill you.
Right, right. So, I mean, I know we know the answer to this, but I want you to let the listeners know, does it feel like you have to constantly work at it? Right? Like if I feel sad, I've got to like it's does it feel like it's an efforting that I think a lot of people think that if they're struggling with this their whole life, that there's this constantly efforting to get these parts like, all right, sadness. Okay, no one freak out. Sadness is, you know what I mean? Sort of,
Mhm.
does it feel like that? Does it feel like it's just so, it's a lifelong of efforting and work?
Um, that's a fun question because there's a part that's like, yes. And my self energy is like, no, it's not. So the thing that I think actually happens is that when parts, it's the parts that are coming in that are like, this, I have to keep doing this. Like, when it's going to happen. But when self energy is there, and when I was working with Shadow Monster, I would have huge amounts of stuff happen in a very short amount of time, and it flowed. It wasn't an effort. It was not um, this like fight to make it happen when I was in self energy. Now, if I was in a part, yeah, there was some conflict inside, but it's also with my suicidal parts and like what the work that I've done with them so far has allowed them to relax in a way in which I don't have to keep doing the same kind of thing. Like don't really I don't relate to Shadow. Well, he's not Shadow Monster anymore, but I don't relate to him like that anymore. I don't have to do as much of the boundaries. He's very free to wander inside my system as he wants to because he's Ryan, and he has the role of being a deeply caring part, and that's what he has always was always intended to do. So it's not like that's a burden to him. He just does it naturally, and it's amazing. Like, and I don't have to do anything to make that happen.
Yeah,
Um
yeah,
the Working with other parts is like, there's, to me, I do think that working with our parts is a lifelong thing, but I the more we do it, the easier it becomes to get into self and to be with them and to the process just happens. How I would describe it. It's just like there's not really efforting. And when there is, it's like, oh, that's clearly a time when I need the extra support from my therapist, or usually it's the support from my therapist. There's not anybody else really
Right,
who's
right, right.
like, yeah.
And your friends thank you for that, right? Like, go see your therapist.
Yeah.
But also I think it's parts, and you tell me if you, the sort of it's parts also saying like when it feels like efforting, then it's parts saying we're tired of this guy, or like we're
Right.
like I'm tired of whatever's happening over here. So we need self to kind of come into the situation. So it almost is a
Right.
trailhead, right? Sort of if it feels like
Yes.
that, then it becomes a trailhead that needs our attention.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it is a life skill actually, right?
Hmm.
Sort of it's sort of a lifetime, and it's a life skill of unblending and being with our parts and developing that self energy. And the more we have it, the more we want it, and the more we actually have it, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Right. I think so too. And I think it also, the more practice there is, there's it becomes easier. But I think what's really happening is that there's then more trust, and there's also more awareness. So like I can, um even when I'm having, so I'm pregnant, and being pregnant has made going inside very different than before I was pregnant, which has
Really?
been an interesting, yeah, very, very different. It's much more, it's I struggle more with it. I don't know why.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's just a thing that's happening. But even in knowing that, and the IFS skills that I have, I can have the awareness of, oh, so I'm having a harder time going in. Okay, so there are parts. There's one it's parts and one it's hormonal. Like, oh, there's parts that are not wanting me to go inside for some reason. Okay.
Mm.
But even in knowing that, I'm still actually inside even though I'm not inside. It's like I have the awareness. Here's this part who's doing this thing. Okay. Great. Now I
Yes.
know that. I
Yes.
may not fix I'm not really trying to fix anything, but
But you're a
it
little bit unblended, right? But just by doing
right.
that, there's a little bit of unblending. Oh, okay. So I'm noticing parts still don't want me to go inside. And then right there, I'm noticing that, and I'm a little bit inside, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. It's like, and I think that can happen, just in general. Of like, it can be in our world, in our, like, in the small way. So when we're not in a therapy session with our therapist, because when we're in therapy with our therapist and doing internal deep work, we're doing parts work. It can feel very deep and like this magical thing is happening, but it doesn't have to be like that every time you're going in with your parts. So you can have the, um awareness of like, hey, I'm walking down the street and I just got a little bit anxious. Huh. And then you can reframe it and be like, instead of I'm anxious, oh, a part of me is anxious and it's worried about the dog that's across the street that doesn't have an owner. Okay, I can notice that. It doesn't mean I need to go inside and have a whole deep session and figure out why am I afraid of the dog. Like, I
Right.
mean, you could, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I love that. Well, because what happens, I think, when we're walking down the street and we notice we get anxious, the anxiousness sort of creates probably other parts come up sort of it, so there's an anxious part and there's another
Right.
part that's afraid that we're anxious and fearful and oh my gosh, how are we gonna we're supposed to be on our way to do this, da, 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 sort of all this stuff,
Right.
instead of being like, okay, let me just check in what's happening, then I'm anxious. It slows us down, and
Hmm.
then we can just check in and be like, oh, okay, and the anxious can tell us why we're anxious instead of
Yeah.
having all these other parts freaking out that we're anxious.
Right. Yeah.
I love that.
Exactly.
And I love that that's how it becomes a lifestyle, right? Like IFS is
Exactly.
really a lifestyle. It's a mindset, and it's a lifestyle of, right? So it's not just me sitting in my therapist's office or in a meditation chair and going inside and having
Right.
eyes closed. It is sort of just knowing that, oh, okay, part of me is feeling this, or part of, oh, I notice a part of me is taking over, or part of me. Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's actually, you saying that reminds me of what happened with my suicidal parts. I got to a space when I was intently working with them where I was driving somewhere and had a suicidal thought of like just getting in a car crash or something. And in literally about probably a minute, maybe even 30 seconds, I acknowledged, like, oh, I see that you're there. I hear you. I'm here with you. And then it just went, the suicidal thought went away. The part didn't go away. It eased back and was like, okay, thank you. And then it was fine. It's like to go from hours and hours of thinking about it to literally 30 seconds, it was mind boggling. And that was when I was like, IFS is the thing that makes the difference.
Wow, you're like, it's a miracle. Well,
Yeah.
because I think that was my point when I was talking about the firefighters at the beginning. It seems like that's your parts. Let me analyze your system. That's
Okay.
why that it sounds like your parts found that was a way to get your attention. Here's how
Yeah.
we get her attention is we put these suicidal thoughts in her head. And so this part of you was like, "Oh, I need your attention for some reason." Drive your car into the snowbank and then you're like, "Oh, hey, buddy, what's up?" And they're like, "Oh, I have your attention. I don't have to use hours and hours and hours. I can, and
Right.
wow, or tap me on the shoulder. Oh, wow, here I've got your attention." And so it's like
Yeah.
parts were using that to get your attention, and then all these
Absolutely.
different parts were using it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I do think I have one other thing that I haven't said for listeners in particular is um, when you're having suicidal thoughts, if there's any way to recognize that it's they're telling you something and to get a little bit of space. I know that can sound like what are you talking about? um, but literally like trusting that it's there for a reason and seeing if you can have just a
Mm,
small shift because it really is. It's little baby steps at a time. My journey is like a 12-year journey. So it's like
mm,
this doesn't happen overnight. And see if you can tune into what's that little baby step, that little shift. And it might be something like, today I really just need to call my friend, or today I really need to focus on the fact that I want to go see this movie on Tuesday or whatever, just to get you
we
through the
can't go see
moment.
movies. What are you talking about? Who's going to see a movie?
That
Use
was
a
some
different example.
that was literally something that I used to be like think on. Like seeing my therapist has always been one of like, well, I got to just make it to Wednesday so I can see my therapist again. I got to tell her again, and
Yeah,
then I can. And
yeah.
if you can just bargain with yourself enough times and go and reach out for support, particularly I think IFS is amazing. Start there. It might save you years.
Yeah, years of therapy.
Yeah.
I agree. So I'm just going to deepen that just a little bit. So I'm not going to deepen it. I'm going to ask you to deepen it. So if people are struggling, if the listeners are struggling with having a lot of suicidal thoughts, you're saying the first step would be just to invite them to recognize that that's a part of them. And
Hmm.
just by recognizing that it's a part, that begins to give them a little bit of space. So that
Yeah.
suicidal part is not choking you, is actually coming outside of you a little bit so you can see it and get to know it, and just recognizing it as a part gets you a little bit of space. And then
Yes.
more space happens as you recognize that maybe that part has a message for you or has a good intention for you. And then
Hmm.
now we've got a little more space with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And once you get the message, then you can help usually go to what does it need or what do you need, and then you can continue to work on with the boundaries and like changing the entire way that you relate to it, but it's little steps at a time. Just take
That
the next little step,
I love that.
whatever it is that feels right to you,
Yeah.
beyond actually acting on the suicidal thoughts.
Don't take that step.
Yeah,
Why shouldn't people take that step?
that is such a long um
You don't have to answer that question.
i I think that's is a fun conversation to have. I So there's a part of me that wants to say people should not take that step because we value life, and I do value life, and I do not want to create a podcast where I'm telling people to kill themselves. Like that is definitely not my intention in any of this. So there's that, and there's also this, I do hold this belief or this understanding that there's nothing wrong with dying by suicide. Some people die by suicide, and that's the path that they chose, and I can't make that assessment of what's right or wrong for somebody.
Mm,
It's like that's the very short answer to that, while trying to hold back. Like as a therapist, I also like we have these rules and ethics and that,
right.
you know.
Right. And thank you for that honest and like really vulnerable answer. Like I get that clearly that was not a question I had thought about or we talked about, but I just thought, huh, yeah. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. The last question I have, and then, well, before I ask you the last question, how do people find you? What are your offerings? Like, tell people about you at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so my business name is Self Grounded Therapy. You can find me online at selfgroundedtherapy.org. You can also find me on Psychology Today if you search Heidi Lindeman. I also have a YouTube channel, which is Self Grounded Therapy. I'm on YouTube, and um, yeah, so people can find me in those spaces online. If you live in Colorado and you need a therapist, I am doing everything virtual right now. That's probably everybody is.
yeah,
But you have to live in the state of Colorado for me to legally see you for individual sessions. I do have space right now. Well, I have some space right now. I'm going on maternity leave in February. But if you're listening to this after I come back from maternity leave, I will have space then. And I so right now I'm doing just individual sessions for adults. I do have a group for people who have suicidal thoughts, but I have not been doing that during COVID because I really want it to be in person.
okay,
So at some point when we're in person again, that will be something that I offer again, hopefully.
yes, yeah, great. That sounds
Yeah,
great. Okay, so the last question is if you could do anything you wanted to, like you don't, anything in the world you want to, doesn't matter, what would you do? Sort of for job, life, passion, what would you do?
if I could do anything in the world that I wanted to. Well, I'm kind of already doing. If I could do anything in the world, I would want to be one supporting people who have suicidal thoughts and helping them transform their own relationship with those parts of them. And I want to be a mom. And I'm about to be a mom. So, and I am a therapist, an IFS therapist. I just want to reach more people, and I really want to help change the stigma and the conversation around suicide. It just every time I talk about it, I just get goosebumps. I'm just like, there's so much that I want to do around making it so that suicide is a conversation like getting a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
And it's
sounds great.
like not on a different level.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it, and it was super fun talking to you.
You're welcome. I enjoy talking about it.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.
Today's episode was sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside.